From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Community Catalysts, the podcast that examines the qualities of community leadership and the many paths and forms it can take. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman. Today, law and order and social media in one of America's most dangerous cities. My guest is Martin Podsiad, a police detective in New Haven, Connecticut, where he helped build the department's criminal intelligence unit from the ground up. We're going to start with lessons from the streets of New Haven, but I want our listeners to know that from his work, he's gained some really interesting insights into how community leaders can effectively use social media, and you're going to want to stay tuned for that. Welcome, and thanks for joining us, Detective Martin Podsiad.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And Martin, we should say right up front that you're here to talk about your own personal experience and perspective, but you're not here as an official spokesperson for the New Haven Police Department, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
Okay. So, Martin, I want to start with just kind of the basic dichotomy. New Haven is home to one of America's bastions of privilege, Yale University, yet it also has the reputation of having one of the highest crime rates in America. Can you just kind of help us understand what's going on in your community?
Yeah, so I think, in 2011, per capita, we caught kind of a reputation for being one of the worst cities. I was there during that time, and like any inner city, it kind of goes through its ebb and flow of crime. I've been there since 2008. We hit our high in 2011. And if you look at the statistics after 2011, they started to downward spiral. And crime across the nation kind of ebbs and flows also. It's not just us. When you look at crime statistics for us and then just broadly across the United States, it kind of does the same thing. It kind of goes up and down. And there's many factors for it. A lot of them not even police related. Most people will know that crime is a kind of a socioeconomic issue. It's just an ongoing struggle like anywhere else.
Martin, I was also researching a bit about New Haven, and I learned that it's one of the most diverse populations for a city of its size, about 130,000 people. Is that about right?
Yeah.
I'm curious, what have you learned about what it takes to protect and serve the full diversity of your community?
So, when I got there and before I got there under Chief Pastor, community policing, right? That was like the big model. And I will say this, that in order to be a good cop, you're in the community. It just is what it is. Our city currently is broken down to 10 districts. So we have 10 policing districts, almost like little precincts. This is a good thing and a bad thing, but when you come on, you kind of find your rhythm and you go to a district and you kind of, like we call it district pride, you kind of end up staying there. And each district has its own culture, right? Some of them are maybe more Hispanics, some of them more Black, some of them more white, some of them are pretty mixed. But overall in New Haven, like think about it, you could go from talking to a PhD Yale student, right? And 5 minutes later, be dealing with, somebody that's homeless and has some emotional issues. So as far as diversity is concerned, I think that we are truly, and I would say, Yale definitely adds to that, one of the most diverse cities currently in the state. But you definitely get to communicate, or at least attempt to, with a lot of different people.
And so what's a lesson that comes out of how someone like you is relevant and sympathetic or empathetic and respectful, and you're constantly switching depending on who you're talking to individually and what part of town you're in?
You have to be extremely adaptable, and you have to be not so much, everybody uses this word, be sensitive to culture. I just think you have to be aware of different cultures. I think that's a pretty huge lesson of being an inner city cop, period.
I'm going to fast forward you because I know that, you not only worked as a beat police officer, you worked undercover, and you've worked some big complicated cases, including homicides and RICO investigations involving organized crime and asset forfeiture. And so I also know that you're particular expertise is interview and interrogation. I want to ask you about that. I want to ask you, what is something that you understand about how to connect and communicate with people that comes right from your expertise in interview and interrogation?
So I teach interviewing currently to the private sector and in law enforcement. And the easiest thing I could tell you is that an interview is a conversation, right? Like you're interviewing me, but we're actually having a conversation.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we forget that when we hear the word interview. Like we don't even use interrogation. I guess it's still called that in law enforcement circles. I actually don't see the difference. And there in certain aspects, people are like, well, an interrogation is when you get like really start honing in on their guilt. It's all an interview. It's all a conversation to me.
Interrogation sounds a lot more adversarial. Interview sounds a lot friendlier, right?
Of course. Yeah. And in the end, it really is. It's a two-way conversation, right? Because that person, if you just sat here and just shot questions at me, like, give me your name, like that's the kind of that's what people most think of an interview. But it's very conversational. Here's the things I would tell you. Be genuine, right? Like I am who I am. The person you see here right now speaking to you is how I am in an interview. Don't lie. So, if something is bad, then just admit it, right?
Wait, like this is the advice you're giving to the person who's being interviewed
well,
by the
police?
police?
I just think those are things that I learned from doing interviews.
I see.
I'm just honest. Like if somebody says like, hey, this is bad, huh? Yeah, it's definitely not good. I'm not going to sit there and minimize it or sugarcoat it. And the person that, like I said, that you see is who you get in an interview. We don't do bad cop, good cop like you see in the movies.
Yeah, but I have to imagine you've interviewed some pretty dangerous, people w'ho've done some pretty awful things.
Yeah, for sure.
So, how are you interviewing them? Are you buddying up to someone who's just done this awful thing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not sometimes you see in the movies where people are like, oh, it's not necessarily like that, right? A lot of times in interviewing, people say like rapport building, like build a rapport. Listen, if somebody is sitting there and they did a homicide, like how much do we really have in common? Like what are we going to talk about? Hey, did you see the game last night? Like they know what they're there for. And, I clearly know what I'm there for. So the interviews, I don't do that. Like I'm pretty forward. Like I'm going to tell you why you're there, why I'm there, what I'd like to know, how it may benefit you or not benefit you. Obviously, all interviews, especially custodial, require Miranda. So, they've been advised of their rights. As long as I've been at the department, we videotape all of our interviews. So there's never a question of like coercion or threats or promises. I've never had that issue. I love interviewing, but I just think be yourself. I will tell you this, which you find a surprise. I don't smoke. But if the person I'm interviewing smokes, I smoke.
Huh.
Smoking is a social act. Everybody that comes in for an interview, I offer them food. When they eat, I also eat. That's a social act. Most of our important conversations happen around a dinner table. So eating and talking is a social act. So I do both with them.
And you're thinking what? You're thinking that it's a social act that somehow psychologically you get synced with them somehow because you're doing this act with them?
Yeah, it's like mirroring, right? Like mirroring body language, or like, they sit a certain way, you sit a certain way. It's all part of it. Like people talk to people who they like or want to be like, period.
Tell me how that works in your world. Do you have an example of that? I mean, you don't have to name names, but who's someone that you had to do that with that actually worked that way?
So no, I'll give you an example. So when I was a patrol officer, right? When I was in a car just driving around the neighborhood, and I say this to newer patrol officers coming on now. The time to get to know people is not when you have to be a cop, right? It's not when you're called there. The time to build rapport and get to know people is when you don't have to be a cop. I came under a district manager or a lieutenant by name of Thaddeus Reddish. He was the training officer in the academy. And later he was a lieutenant on the street and I worked for him. I also worked for Lieutenant Streetel for a while. And they were big on you just walking around and getting to know the neighborhood. So, New Haven is known for walking beats. Like we call them walking beats. When you're a rookie, when I got on, you walked for like a year. You didn't get a car. And what that does, it forces social interactions for those people who don't like to socially interact necessarily, especially with people they may not know. I don't have that problem. You could drop me anywhere in the world and I'll find somebody to have a conversation with. I'm not shy and I'm not worried about that. So I got to know a lot of the people that lived in my neighborhood just through those interactions. I got to know their family members, their kids, their parents, their friends, their girlfriends. I knew them. So when I sat down in the box, we already kind of knew each other. You know what I mean? Even to this day, if you were to interview somebody from that particular neighborhood I worked, and we do this for other neighborhoods too, you would call the cop that you knew in that neighborhood to kind of help you with this interview because they already had this connection. I'll give you an example. I was looking one time for a suspect. He was wanted on a warrant, and I knew him pretty well. We have numerous interactions, good and bad, policing and not policing. We knew each other very well. So I knew I was going to find him. And I knew, for example, that he ate a number one at McDonald's with a strawberry milkshake. And that if he was going to have any midnight snack ever, it would be a Slim Jim. So when I pick him up for this warrant, one of the things I say to him is like, hey, you're going in. I have to talk to you. I'm going to run to McDonald's. I'm going to get you a number one with a strawberry milkshake, right? And he kind of looks surprised, like, yeah. And I'm like, I know. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to get you some Slim Jims too. And now he's completely like, but these are questions I asked of his family members. These are things that I would ask normally when I was looking for somebody. I would ask really simple questions, not like, oh, what do they like to eat? I would say things like, McDonald's or Burger King, and they would say McDonald's. And I'm like, all right, what at McDonald's? Number two, no pickles, with a strawberry milkshake, whatever the thing was. And I would just remember those things. And they were very important to me. So they're like genuine connections. So although I am at that time a police officer and they may be, a suspect, a witness, we already had a connection. And it wasn't built in that interview room. We already knew each other. And I think that really helped me get to where I am.
I want to ask you if what you've just told me mirrors what I hear in other places, right? In companies, I hear about managers who are told to practice the art of management by walking around, which is just walk around your office, get to know people, see what they're doing, how they're doing, and be accessible. There doesn't need to be another agenda other than access. If you are running a nonprofit organization and you're fundraising, you don't just go out and ask potential donors for money. You develop a relationship with them over time, find out their priorities so that when the time comes, you can ask them to support your organization in a manner that resonates with something that they already believe and prioritize.
Correct.
If you're a mayor or a city council member or a city staffer, to know the people who are perhaps some of the most difficult people who show up at council meetings, but to know who they are as people so that your response to them is a human response as opposed to a official response. All of those things are part of this same playbook of getting to know the people in your realm.
Yes, 100%. That doesn't change. I was very lucky. The current chief, that's the chief now, I worked for him when he started the criminal intelligence unit. And I was very, very lucky in the sense that he was accessible. He sat in the office pretty much with us. And he was a cop's cop, like understood the work that needed to be done. But the other thing that really, really helped was he wasn't guarded in the sense of, for example, if we had to go to court and meet with the prosecutor, there was not like hand holding. He was very like, I trust you. Hey, you're going to go meet the prosecutor. Go ahead. I don't have to go with you. And everything around that unit, because Intel is I mean, it's kind of intimate. Like, you have to know people. We just learned that everything is built around relationships. And I would tell newer guys coming into the unit or, coming on to policing, hey, when you call court, when you need a favor, you should know the name of the person answering the phone, and they should know you, right? That FaceTime prior to needing a favor is super, super important. And that's still to this day like that, right? I still operate the same way. Like, if I need something, I know exactly who to go to ask for that or to make that introduction that they could vouch for me.
And now for something completely different.
Okay.
So from all of this, from your experience on the street as a beat cop to working undercover to working homicides and all of this, how did you end up being the department's social media expert?
Okay, so I owned a small business, and I didn't have money to do marketing, and social media, was coming along, and I just kind of started doing the research, and kind of just learning social media algorithms, hashtags, just kind of from the ground up. Watched a lot of YouTube videos, just did a lot of research. The other end of it is I was into photography. That's kind of what I did. That's how I was approached initially, was to just do some photos, do some content work. Also during that time, so I'm in a relationship, and my girlfriend was doing social media marketing for restaurants and other small businesses. So we kind of teamed up and we're kind of running that as a side hustle also. So when I kind of start doing content for the department, we are ahead in certain things, but we are definitely not there when it comes to social media. We were behind, as are most of the departments around the state. Initially, we have 2 pages currently. We have the New Haven PD official page, which is just a New Haven Police Department page. And then we have a recruitment page, where we just do recruitment off of. I was initially more involved on the recruitment side, which I call the marketing side, and I call the New Haven Police Department page the branding side. I was originally there. I created some videos. I started playing around with hashtags, and instead of just putting stuff up, I was really watching the insights. I was watching what was working, what wasn't working. Mm-hmm. That was how much interaction we're getting from non-followers on the recruitment page, which is big for us. On the NHPD official page, I was looking at more of the interactions we were having. So when we were putting out a story, what was the interaction? What were the comments like? Were we getting likes? Were we getting any negative comments? And of course you do. You get just, I call them the bots, like the people that just go on there and for no reason are going to negatively comment. So we're kind of running the 2 pages kind of separately. And recently we started to kind of really co-join them and run them together, that the whole team is involved in both of them. But it was, just by happenstance. The sergeant who's running the recruitment page was walking by my desk. We started talking, and next thing I knew, within like 2 days, I was involved in the recruitment page.
I understand that you got involved in the recruiting because the police department really needed to do a better job at recruiting, right? You were losing officers, and you needed to appeal, and not just out of New Haven. You needed to appeal on a regional basis or greater, right?
Correct. Yeah. So what I call the NHPD page, the branding page, is because that's more for the people we directly impact as a police department, right? It only needs to reach so far geographically. People in Akron, Ohio don't care what the New Haven Police Department is doing. But a college kid in Akron, Ohio may want to work for a New Haven Police Department. So, the reach on the recruitment page for us is nationwide, right? We're trying to run some of these strategies nationwide. And on the New Haven PD page, we're just really caring about our little piece of the pie, as far as the people we impact directly.
Let me restate this, because your terminology is not obvious to me, so I just want to make sure I'm getting it. The official page, what you call the branding page, is essentially the front door to the police department. Anyone who might need the police department services needs to be able to go in. There's an organized, linear way of figuring out which department to do whatever piece of business that you need to do. What you're calling the marketing page is a recruitment page. You're thinking this is not about people who are already coming to us. This is about what? This is about us making ourselves relevant or appealing to people far flung, because we want them to know about our department. We want them to think that this is a place that they might want to work specifically. Am I getting that
Correct.
right?
Yeah, correct. Absolutely. Yeah. So, for example, I'll make a post on that page, and then I will use hashtags for Philadelphia, right? Pennsylvania. They'll all be Philadelphia related content. And then I watch, to see if, okay, we're getting non-follower interaction in that particular area, because I'm trying to send our product as far as I can so people buy into that product.
You're trying to make the New Haven Police Department relevant in Philadelphia, not because you're trying to prevent crime, but because you're trying to attract people who might be interested in working for the New Haven Police Department.
Correct, 100%. So the strategies there are a little bit different. And on the branding page, we are trying to, people use transparency all the time with the police department, like, oh, transparency, but it's kind of such a negative term. And what I mean by that is, like, it seems like transparency only comes out when something negative happened. Oh, let's be transparent about it. And on the NHPD official page, we're like, no, let's be transparent how the police department works, right? Something as simple as I get all the time. Well, what rank is a sergeant? Is that, lower or higher than a captain? So that's part of our kind of strategy moving forward, is really just showing our brand, like what we are, some of our history, some of our current events. We highlight, officers, their accomplishments. We put up body cam footage, not only when something bad happened. We put on body cam footage when there's like positive things that happen, right? Positive interactions with the community. That's why I call it our branding page. It's who we are.
Martin, I want you to go deeper on the marketing, what you call the marketing side of this, which is, what is it? How do you, I'm going to get granular here. How do you make the New Haven Police Department relevant in Philadelphia or other places that are hundreds of miles away from you? What are you actually doing with your social media?
So I will tell you this. When I signed on to kind of help out with this project, one of the first things I did is I kind of looked at the page and looked at what we were doing. And it was very, I use the term lollipop, like handing out lollipops. It was very generic. And then I thought about, what are the things that made policing cool for me? And I made sure that the visuals matched that. So I started doing a lot of night photography. Like, if you look at the NHPD recruitment page and you look at most of our officer highlights, a lot of those photos are taken at night, because that's when people think policing is done. It's a completely different feel. So, one of the things that I tried to tell the captain that was in charge at that time is, we need to make policing look cool. So we kind of visually started to go there. We started to do certain videos on highlights with our officers. We actually, one of our classmates, Officer Cole, we just did I want to say it's like a minute and a half video on him, and it had 11,000 plays within 3 days, which is pretty good for our page, for the amount of followers that we have. Why? Because I kind of storyboarded this video where it highlighted him as a Jamaican immigrant, then his story to becoming a medic in the Army in order to get his citizenship, and then from there moving on to be a police officer. So we're highlighting our teams, the events that we're involved in, and also the people that work for us, in a way where people, once again, talk to people they like or want to be like. We're hoping that somebody sees that social media and says, man, I want to do that. That's a cool thing. So we did a video on our motor units. We did a video on our canine units. We did a video on our hostage negotiation team, on our SWAT team. So we're putting out all these services we have, but not in a way, to really say hey, here's what we have. In a way, we're hey, this is what we have, and we want you to be a part of it. So it's an ongoing process. I've been involved with it for a year and a half, almost 2 years, I want to say. We've grown a lot since then. in our strategies. We had a meeting today, going forward, kind of like where we're going to go. But yeah, we're trying to do this mass appeal. And to be honest with you, everybody is doing that. That's not just us. You're literally seeing that from every other police department in the state. And it's kind of funny because I'm getting calls from other police departments.
Yeah. But you're also, but part of what your insight here is that it's not just the words that you put out. You think those visuals that you're putting out are really important. What have you learned about what's, can I call it an arresting image that you would put out? Is that too much of a pun?
No. That's completely fine. So, we put out videos, for example, and I could tell you, right, like there's a reason why a Instagram story is 15 seconds. Right? Because we're looking at like attention span of human beings. If I can't capture you in that realistically, probably a 5 to 9 second mark where you hit a link to sign up for our department, I'm probably not going to get you. So it's funny because today we sat in a meeting and we talked about some of the videos we put out in the past. And one of the people there was like, "Oh, I love that video." I'm like, "Yeah, because you're 52. And you're used to that kind of media." But the problem is the 20-something-year-olds we're going after, they don't watch 2-minute videos. They're never going to watch that. We need to be able to capture them, in that first 3 seconds, really important, so they don't just scroll, and then get them to stay in that 5 to 9 second mark to click that link. So the visuals, I think, are big.
Can you explain what needs to go into that video, or do we just need to follow the New Haven Police Department on Instagram?
No, I will tell you. I say this, and I said it today in the meeting. We are a marketing page. The recruitment page is a marketing page. People buy emotions or action. Period. I either need to capture an emotion or show some kind of action that's going to make you stay there. Period. If you don't have one of those two, I don't think anybody's staying for more than 5 seconds.
Martin, I have one last question I have to ask here, because I know that I have a lot of listeners who are elected officials, mayors and council members in particular. And a question that I get from them all the time is, how should I approach being on social media? And I will be honest with you, I am no expert in this, and I have consulted others, and I've heard two different pieces of advice. The lawyers and the city managers and the bureaucrats say, stay away from it. Just don't go there, because there is going to be blowback and it's not worth it. It's always going to be ugly. I have heard from other people who have greater intestinal fortitude, perhaps, who have said, yeah, if you're going to go there, you better have a posse, because whatever blowback is going to come, you need to be able to counteract it. What's your advice to community leaders who want to be on social media but don't quite know how to approach it?
Here's what I think. I think if you're not on social media, you're not going to go anywhere as a community leader. I think your reach is only going to be so far. Anybody we meet nowadays, right? Like, we don't ask for phone numbers. Like, what's the first thing? Like, hey, are you on, you're on the gram, or, do you have a Snap or whatever it is, right? Facebook, if you're in a certain age group. LinkedIn, right? If you're in a professional, like LinkedIn is a social media app. Like, no matter how you look at it, it really is. It extends your reach. So first and foremost, I think 100% you need to be on social media. If you're not, you're not going to be able to communicate to a certain demographic, period. Like, I don't care who says otherwise. It's just not going to happen.
A younger demographic. Correct.
And when we're talking about younger, we're talking about a voting block, right? We're talking about people even into their late 20s that literally grew up on social media, right? If you were born, the MySpace age, but then going into early 2000s, you probably grew up on social media, right? So it's a voting block.
Right. So you're saying if you want to be relevant to people essentially under the age of 30, you need to be using social media to display emotions or actions.
100%.
And video in particular, you're fond of.
It has to be. And I think also, I'm trying to think of like a politician that has a decent social media page. Listen, Bernie Sanders, right? As old as he is, he's on Instagram every single day. It's probably not himself, but there's a guy, an older Elizabeth Warren, right, on social media. But I think the lesson there is this: when I'm talking about displaying emotion is be your genuine self, right? I think that you need to have some professional content on there, but I think you also need to have that, hey, I'm in my house having a coffee content where people connect with that. When they see that, they're like, oh, you know what? I have coffee. Wow, man, like, oh, wow, we drink the same brand. One of the things we talked about, for example, the other day in a meeting is if we just did quick clips of our cops saying what's their favorite place to eat in New Haven, because people instantly associate with that. Or if we did Sally's or Pepe's for pizza, like people associate with that. And it's a really quick, very easily consumable content, right? It's 7 or 8 seconds, but it makes it's not the guy standing in a suit with a tie at a podium, right? It's a guy sitting at his kitchen table. I think that's really huge. I think social media changed politics in a way that we don't think a lot of these politicians as like stuffy old men, right? We see them as kind of like human beings, right? We see like behind, kind of their political veil. And I think it's super important to do that. I think anybody that's not on there, you're not going to hit a certain voting block. And, and younger people compared to when I was growing up are a lot more involved in politics. Your 20-year-olds are voting because it is affecting them. And I think if you're not hitting that, what happens when those 20-year-olds are now 30-something-year-olds? You're still not reaching them. Are you going to try to reach them then?
Martin, I want you to complete the circle for me, because if I understand what you're saying, you've just brought back something you said much earlier in our conversation about the nature of interviewing people, perhaps who are adversarial or whatever. And the phrase that you used was, people want to what?
People talk to people they like or want to be like.
And what you've learned through interviews and interrogations is really your approach to social media, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
The word that comes to mind is authenticity, but I think there's another word that you want to use here, which is vulnerability.
Vulnerable is another one, right? Because like, think about it this way. If you're a mayor of the city, right? And all of a sudden I'm following your page and I get an alert that you're going live at 7:30 on a Saturday morning. And I'm like, whoa, did something happen? Right? I click that live and it's you just making a coffee, and you just turn around as the mayor of the city, go, hey, city of whatever, New York, Baltimore, just wanted to say good morning while I'm making this here cup of coffee, and my favorite coffee is whatever it is. And then that's it. You guys have a great day. Click. I think that would have a huge social impact. I think it would be pretty big.
I think we all learned a great deal from you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Again, my thanks to Detective Martin Podsiad of the New Haven Police Department. This episode was produced by Kerry Lengel and edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. Jenna Maisel is our production assistant. Our executive producer is John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. If you have a question, comment, or story to share, reach me at 602-688-2724 or Comcats, that's COMCATS, at socialprosperity.us. I'd love to hear from you. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.